Good afternoon, everyone. This is Nancy Thomas Price in the State Department office. Thank you for joining our interim assessment webinar today. Before we get going, I would just like to do a sound check. If you can hear me okay, please raise your hand. Thank you so much. We do have a large group today, so everyone has been muted. Please feel free to use the question box to answer your questions. Try to address those throughout the webinar at transition periods. If your question does not get answered in the course of the webinar, we will post a Q&A with the posting of the recording and the slides afterwards on our website. And again, those are posted on the SDE website under assessment and on the general resources and the comprehensive assessment pages under training. We'll go ahead and get started today, although I know I still see some people are logging on. I can tell you that awesome things are really happening out in our districts. I feel so energized to have been invited into so many districts this fall. Between about the middle of August and the middle of November, I kind of have a window where I'm able to get out and actually do some workshops within schools and school districts. I will have seen, I think, about 25 districts by the middle of November. And so I can, it's really important for me to be interfacing directly with the folks in the districts and with the teachers to whom this system is addressing and is designed. Last year, about 130 school districts used the interim assessments in some way, some in a very systemic way and planned way, and some were just curious, and so they opened a test here or there, a teacher here or there, a school here or there. But we are seeing increased usage of the system as a whole, and so that's very encouraging. For those of you that are looking for handouts, I just wanted to remind you that those are attached to your viewing panel today, and those will also be posted. They were sent out to the people yesterday, last night, who had already registered. So if you've registered today, you probably didn't get those, but they are available to you. Many of you have heard me go through this before. I might sound like a broken record, but the summative assessment, our ISAT, was not meant to stand alone. It is part of a balanced assessment system provided to us by Smarter Balanced. And there are three pieces to that system. The digital library is the first piece and represents a collection of teaching and professional resources that teachers can use throughout the day, throughout their teaching, integrated into the lessons that they're already doing with students. About 80% of the information a teacher gets on how students are doing and whether or not they should modify their instruction comes from that formative assessment, that embedded assessment that happens during the learning. And so another 15%, often we can get that information from stopping, doing somewhat of a more formalized assessment, and that helps us really stop and check and see if students are with us. That data can also be used in a very formative way, but it's a little bit different than what we consider as the formative assessment process. Summative assessment, we hope, in classrooms is at a minimum and used very carefully. Summative assessments are graded, and students feel like those are quite high stakes. Our summative assessment at the end of the year, I think students from our interviews with them see that as a very high stakes assessment. And so we want to give them the benefit of the doubt and have them feel very prepared for it. When we use the system in its entirety, we can benefit the most. And so what I'm going to talk about today is primarily the interim assessment piece. I did do a webinar on the digital library back a few weeks ago, maybe it's been 3 weeks or so, and that webinar is posted on the State Department website. When I talk about these pieces, I end up talking about all of them because they're very well integrated. And so when I talk about the interim assessments, we're going to touch a little bit on the summative and then also the digital library. Both standards and assessment of the standards can inform instruction. Standards, of course, are what we teach, and the assessment is how we know they know it. So really what we're doing when we use the digital library and the interim assessment, formative assessment and interim assessment, we're really looking at teaching standards and having some supports for teaching standards, but we're looking through the other way, through the eyes of the assessment. I think that you'll all agree that this is where change happens. This is where scores on our end of year test happen. And so teachers and students must feel supported. They must have feedbacks throughout the entire year so that students can change their learning and teachers can modify and tweak their teaching. Again, the summative assessment was not meant to stand alone. This system is very much designed to support teachers and to help them facilitate that classroom learning of standards. As you're introducing, if you haven't already, the interim assessments to your students, I would frame them as a way for you and them to improve their knowledge of the standards and not necessarily present interim assessments as a way for us to prepare for the ISAT. Of course, that's happening too, but I think the way that we frame it is very important, and we have to remember that these resources are to help students master the standards, and the end result, of course, we can see some change in those summative scores. But these assessments are not just there to help kids prepare for a test. So some goals for the day, of course, that can't necessarily happen in 1 hour, but the information here hopefully will help you to support teachers knowing how to access and give the interim assessments to their students. We also want to be sure that teachers know how to access the data from summative and interim assessments. As I go to these different districts, it's amazing how teachers say, yeah, my principal just handed me a score, and they don't really get too much more data until we go in and start looking at all of the reports from the summative assessment and all the different ways that those reports can be manipulated, looking at girls versus boys, males versus females, your LEP students' scores compared to your other students' scores, students on IEPs. The reports are all very visual and very interactive and designed for teachers to use them. So if they don't have access to them, they're really missing out. We also want to be sure that teachers know about and how to access some of the aligned resources that, again, work in conjunction with those interim assessments and the data that comes from them, and really are the places that instruction is supported. Specifically, those are item specifications documents, the Airways data tool, which is specific to the interim assessments, and the digital library. Just a few facts about the interim assessments. As I looked over who was registered this time, I noticed that quite a few of our participants today are those that have not used the interim assessments before. So the information on this slide is probably not new if you have used them, but to those that haven't, I just wanted to review a few facts. These are optional. No one is forcing schools to use them. They are not public, so they're not open to the public to use, but they are considered non-secure. So no test security agreement needs to be signed by teachers. Teachers can look at the screens. Teachers should be the ones administering these assessments. You can answer questions that students have throughout the testing, and they just don't have the same secure feel as our summative assessment that's used for accountability. The items come from the same pool. They're written the same way as the summative tests, and blueprints that outline the structure of all these assessments are provided. Off-grade level testing is allowed if you have students that are higher or lower, or students that you need to determine their instructional level. You can arrange to have them take a block that is similar but at a lower or higher grade. The same accessibility features are available and the same testing interface. So this is a good place to see how some of your students that need it respond to text-to-speech, for example. The testing interface is the same, and so the students will have experiences to be on the same ISAT testing software all year long if they're using the interim assessment blocks. There are unlimited opportunities for each assessment. However, the assessments don't change yet, and they're not computer adaptive. So each test has the same questions, and when you give it again, it would again have those same questions in the same order. We're working towards having that change, but right now there are not enough items in the pool for Smarter Balance to make different test forms of every block. Interim comprehensive assessments take about 2 class periods, 2 to 2.5 hours for students to complete, so they're very similar to our ISAT. Interim block assessments that we refer to as the IABs should only take about 1 class period, 30 to 45 minutes, depending on the block and the grade of students and their experience on the software. 2 types of interim assessment. As I mentioned, there's an interim comprehensive assessment, which we refer to as the ICA. We don't recommend using this throughout the year for teaching and learning. One of the reasons is that most students just had this test in the spring, and so that is good data to launch into the school year. Some of our districts do give these in January or February to see where students are mid-year. The interim assessment blocks drill down to a much greater depth and give multiple items on the same assessment target. So these assessments teachers use throughout the year, and there are about 12 different blocks at any grade level when we look at both ELA and math. These are the interim assessment blocks that are available in the different grades. High school, we do just have what's called a high school block. It is typically a block of students that would test in 11th grade. So maybe not the end of 11th grade, but because Idaho is the only one at this point that tests at 10th grade, Smarter Balance has not made additional test forms for grades 9 and 10. So we just have those high school blocks to use, and teachers should frame those to their students as, you know, we know that we haven't covered all of this. I'm just looking for how you're doing on the things that we have covered. They're not graded. They should be low stress for the students, and that data should be available to use in a variety of ways. In math, we have some new blocks this year, 7 new blocks in math. That includes 5 new blocks at the high school level. Those are integrated in the shaded green. And so there are quite a few math blocks. You'll notice as you look at these blocks that the titles of them align with the titles that you see of the content clusters that are in your standards documents. So there shouldn't be any difference there. They're very, very tightly aligned to our standards. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions that have come in at this point, so I'll go ahead and start talking about some of the mechanics of using the interim assessments. I do want you to know that there are many documents that support the preparation and the use for the interim assessments. Those are in the portal, idaho.portal.airast.org, and I have that written on another slide. And once at the home page in the portal, the landing page, you would click on ELA literacy and math assessments, click on the tile representing resources, and then there are a couple folders there. One is for the interim assessments and one is for the digital library. I've blown up the file for the interim assessments, and as you can see, there are some important documents there. Little quick guide so that Teachers can administer the interim assessments without having to pull out our big giant manual. There's an implementation planning checklist and some directions on some of the steps that you go through. Statement of purpose and the overview document, which I attached to today's webinar. The item counts document helps you understand how many items are in each block and if there are items that teachers need to score, and if so, how many. So there are a lot of resources there that can be reviewed as if you're just planning to use the interim assessments. Prior to giving the interim assessment, some things need to happen. The district support tech, usually staff, will need to load the secure browsers for this year. The link to those can be found again on the portal. All students do need to be added to TIDE, just as you would if you were doing the summative assessment. And then if teachers are not added in TIDE, that has to be done. You can go through the list, take out teachers that are no longer with you and add new ones that have come in this year. Every teacher that was in TIDE last year will need to update their password. Once they've done that for the year, they won't need to do that again until next year. And then you also need to create rosters in TIDE. That is necessary for teachers to be able to see their students' data. So in the middle school, for example, those teachers may have 6, 7, even 8 rosters. Same at the high school. Elementary, there may just be one roster or a couple rosters for each teacher. A roster should represent who is sitting in front of a teacher at any given time. So the 25 students in first period, the 22 students in second period, etc. Each of those rosters and those students being taught at the same time should be in rosters. Teachers do need to complete the TA certification course, which is another one of those tiles that we see in the portal. Even if they have taken this course the year before, we do have updates and improvements every year. So you will need to take it, teachers will need to take that again in the fall, as would TAs. You can review the support documents that we just mentioned that are in the portal. And then making some thoughtful decisions with your team about why you're using the interim assessments. Why will we give these? What do we hope to gain? What's the expected outcome, or what is our goal? You might also discuss who will take part in the assessments. Will it just be students that are struggling? Will it be all of your students? Will it just be students in elementary, students in secondary? And then how will we communicate with parents and students that we're using this resource? I do have parents call me sometimes and ask about the ISAT, and when I tell them about the interim assessments and the pieces in our system, in addition to our summative tests, they're very surprised because they usually don't know anything about it. So I think it's a very good idea to involve students in all of this, and then to communicate with parents as well. The individual student reports that are generated from the interim assessments can be reviewed with parents at parent-teacher conferences, at quarter grade reportings, and things like that. This is the interim assessment implementation planning checklist that I mentioned that I put together. Sorry, I haven't updated this. This should say 2017-18, but it basically reviews a lot of what I just went over. And then on the couple pages following, it gives a little bit more specific information and some graphics of the different tiles that you'll use to access some of these tasks. Here's the interim assessment quick guide that teachers can use when they're going to deliver the interim assessments. And then prior to giving the interim assessments, a school coordinator will need to manage this, but you'll want to either upload or manually add student settings in each individual student demographic page that needs those settings. As you're probably aware, we have universal supports that are for every student, and then there are designated supports that are for some students that we've decided need some help to access the test. Designated supports must be indicated in the individual student files, and then accommodations are for those students that are on IEPs. If you're not sure about what the available accommodations and designated supports are, use this document in the accommodations and accessibility folder in the resources section of the portal. You can also, because the interim assessments are very flexible, as I mentioned, give them at a different grade level. So some teachers seem to be in favor of giving a pretest, and what a pretest should really tell us is if a student is ready to learn what we had planned to teach them. So if you're using a pretest, you may use the grade level block of the same title from the year before, especially if those students were not proficient last spring. You do need to go into TIDE, and a teacher can actually do this and indicate the grade level tests, or just say all, so that when you go to assign them, students can see assessments that are other than the grade they're entered in TIDE. And then teachers can use, I wish this was called the previewing application. Teachers can use the assessment viewing application prior to giving an assessment to students. They can just walk through it themselves and see all of the different items and tasks in each of the blocks and the comprehensive. And they would do that under the assessment viewing application. I've cautioned people to not put this on the overhead and actually use the items to teach with, because for any given assessment target, there could be 3 different ways the student is asked for evidence. And so what you may see in the interim assessment is just one example, but we want to teach to the content and not actually to the item. We seem to have a lot better result that way. The test delivery system, same one that we use for delivering the ISAT. The test administrator user guide is here, and that is where teachers would go to open up the interface, the Proctor interface. This is what it looks like when they log in. They will get stopped there if they have not taken that TA course for the year. Test delivery system, which is what we call test administration. Students log in through their secure browser once the teacher opens the session. Just like on the ISAT, they enter their first name, their EDU ID, and when the teacher clicks Start Operational Session, which is this block down below, they would have a session ID pop up, and that is the third piece of information that students need to enter to log in. You would, prior to that, check each of the assessments that you want to make available, or perhaps it's just one assessment that you want to make available for all of the students. You can test one student, you can test 25. You can even, in some cases, with some special circumstances, test students that are not in your building. So on some of the blocks, there are some items that are not scored by the computer and will need to be scored by real people. All roles, except for those in a TA role in TIDE, which is the traditional proctor role, can score items. Items are assigned by default to whoever administers the test. So if you have some students in your session that are actually rostered to other teachers, you will see their items to score. But a school coordinator or a district coordinator can go in and reassign those items back to you to score. Provided with each item is all the information that you will need to score that item or task. There's a scoring guide, a rubric, there can be student exemplars and sample responses to help you adequately score them. All of that scoring is done online through the online teacher hand scoring system, which is another one of the tiles in the portal. We do have both a module and a user guide to help you understand that system, but it's pretty straightforward and fairly simple. Another document that I've mentioned already, the interim assessment item counts, tells you for each of the assessments how many items are in that test. and then how many of them need to be scored by a teacher if they're short answer or if there's an essay. There tend to be more teacher scored items in the ELA blocks than there are in the math blocks. This is what the response list page looks like. And you would just click next to the student's name and click score. The documents that you need to score will come up with that item, and then you can just go through your class list and score each one. The interim full write task, which is part of the performance task, does have an artificial intelligence scoring option. So it will automatically be scored by artificial intelligence, and then the teacher would go into that item, look at the score, and see if they're going to accept it or if they'd like to put in a different score. Both the interim comprehensive and the interim block performance task has this option just for the full write. Okay, we're going to stop here and answer a few questions. There are quite a few questions that have come in. Is there a script for the interims? The only place I found a script was in the ISAT system manual. There is a script for the interim assessments. I don't know if that manual has been posted yet. I can double check that. But go ahead and use that quick guide too. And that should give you some more information. If teachers really need a script, I'm not sure if they do, but if you feel like you need a script, and if you don't find it, just email me and I'll walk through the portal with you and find it, or find out if it hasn't been posted yet, when it will be posted. How are some districts addressing the issue of district writing and math assessments, given more time and importance versus interim assessments? They are fearful that Smarter Balance will be going away and they don't want to lose data. So there's a lot in that question. We don't have any indication that this assessment system is going away. In fact, we have a task force for assessment that includes parents and educators and community members, and the governor's office has said this task force is not to find another assessment. This is our assessment, and we just want to hear from you to provide us some guidance on things we may need to tweak. But every indication that I've been given says that this assessment is not going away anytime soon anyway. District writing and math assessments. You know, the districts can certainly create their own writing and math assessments, but more and more, I'm hearing that teachers don't have time to do that. They also are not skilled item writers, and their items are not going to the depth of knowledge 3 and 4 that the items are on the assessments. So if you find that district assessments are working better for you than the interim assessments that are already out there, paid for and accessible, then I would use those. The goal, I think, is to have more students be proficient each year than the year before. So if you're using something that's helping you do that, I would use those. Most of the districts that have come to me and wanted to use the interim assessments and the training have stopped using other assessments within their district that they didn't feel were helping them change the outcomes at the end of the year. So those are decisions. Unfortunately, we're in Idaho and everything is managed through the districts. And so those are decisions that you have to make at the district level. I think those that have used the interim assessments have continued to use them because they are hearing from teachers that they're helping them a great deal. So again, that's just a district decision. If you have other assessments that you like to use and you feel that you're getting out of them the data that you need, then I would continue to use those. Question about the TA certification course. Some teachers were reporting that they took the course but weren't recognized in the system. We have been having a little bit of difficulty with that. It's sporadic, and so AIR is not able to recreate that situation. So they're having a little bit of a difficulty addressing it. But district folks can go in and check that the TA certification has happened. Actually, I think I can only do it at the state, but the help desk can do it as well. So if you have teachers that have that certificate, have taken the course, but it's not showing in TIDE, just let us know and we'll go in and approve them until we hear that there's an absolute fix and that's not happening anymore. Dave, so this question has to do with the ability to assign different grade levels of assessments to students from the grade they're in. We asked AIR last year to see if we could do that en masse and not have to go into every individual screen to do it. It wasn't something that they were able to do for this year, but that is still on our wish list. And so we have ask them to do that, and we hope that we'll be able to provide the ability to do that in the future. Someone here asked about the test administration manual. Our test administration manual for the ISAT window 2017-18 will not be posted until just before the window opens. So you can look for that before our summative assessment window that opens in mid-March. So I would say sometime in February, maybe even by the end of January, we usually target for the TAM to be posted. Let's see, time frame for AI scoring, short answer. I don't have a time frame for when or if we'll be able to provide computerized scoring for short answer questions. We have a large yearly meeting with AIR in January, and so all of the states that work together on our Smarter Balance contract come together and make some requests, and so we will see if that comes up with the group again. We did have interest in that last year, and so I don't have a time frame. But that has been discussed. Which and what program do school coordinators or DIS coordinators use to assign hand scoring items to a different teacher? Sue, what the school coordinator would do, or district coordinator, is to go into the teacher hand scoring system. You click next to a student's name or click several students, and there's a button at the bottom that you will see that says reassign these items, and then it will pull up a list of teachers and ask you who to reassign them to. So it's very automatic and happens very easily. Will the interim assessments ever become customizable? I'm not sure exactly what is meant by that, but if you are asking, will we have an item bank? From what I'm seeing in the field, there's not enough assessment literacy for teachers to create their own blueprints for an assessment that covers to the same degree what our interim assessments cover now. So in a way, I hope that we don't really provide that, because I don't think there's enough knowledge to, at this point, to put together those test packages ourselves. It's a pretty scrutinized process in making sure that the block covers the content in that section of the standards. So it's not that easy to do. We don't want more work for teachers. And so perhaps it's something we'll look at in the future, but I'm not really sure about that. Here's another question or a comment actually about the TA certification course. So someone mentioned that they found that if the teachers will click view print certificate, they will avoid the issue of it not being recorded, and they don't actually have to print, but the certification will then be able to view it. So again, just kind of working on that issue. If for some reason they take the TA certification course and that certification course isn't allowing them to go in and administer the assessment. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on now. And we're going to talk a little bit about how teachers can use the data from the interim and even the summative ISAT to affect teaching and learning. One of the things that I need to start with is that in order for teachers, really any administrators, even parents, to use the data, they have to understand claims and targets, because all of our data is provided in terms of claims and targets. We're going to start in the fall with the summative data. Teachers looking at the summative data from last spring. There are a couple cases where their classes are not going to have it. So for example, a 10th grade class that didn't test in 9th grade, or a 3rd grade class, and we handle those a little bit differently, but generally starting with the summative data to get the big picture of the classroom. There also should be or could be some work done to integrate blocks into the instructional sequence and curriculum. I know that several districts have done this. Pocatello has done this with their teachers. A couple other districts, and I don't remember off the top of my head at this point. I've been so many places this fall, but some folks are doing that, and that seems to really help teachers understand where a particular block will fall in relation to their current teaching materials. And then in order for teachers to use the data, they really want to use some of those additional supports that are available to cross over into content and help them better understand how these items look in the classroom. I also mentioned that we should have a frame of mind to be looking at the student data to plan forward. Have folks in the training that I do ask the question, what is this telling me about what to do next? Not just what is it telling me, but what is it telling me about what to do next? We have to continually be using this data to plan forward and to understand what needs to change, or maybe if nothing needs to change. We do want to use these blocks to impact learning while there's still time to change the outcome. So waiting until the end of the year to see how we're doing on the standards, we could, if we're not doing well, we could have used up a lot of time for some students. Now they're in someone else's class, and as a teacher, we really can't affect the outcome, because now we're getting a whole new group of students in that may have other strengths and weaknesses that we need to address. Claims. There are 4 claims in each content area. In our assessment, 3 are reported in math because claims 2 and 4 are combined for the purposes of the assessment. These are broad statements of the assessment system's learning outcomes. So the larger categories for our data. Targets are simply descriptions of evidence needed for us to make the claim, or to back up that claim, that a student can, in fact, do whatever it is the claim says we're going to do. In this example, I have students can read closely and analytically to comprehend a range of increasingly complex literary and informational texts. What evidence do we have that they can do that? That is spelled out in the targets. This document is the content specifications. There's another document that I think is a little bit more user-friendly for teachers, but this document is available on our website. Things like determine the intended meanings of words. If students are able to do that, it will back up our claim that they're proficient in that area. In ELA literacy, those assessment targets come straight from the anchor standards. I have an example from math here showing how in math those assessment targets come from the cluster headings. So they are sentences or phrases that come right from our standards documents. And then this is just a visual of kind of how it plays out. Several folks have asked why we don't do any standards-based reporting. And that would really, at this time, in this day and age, it would really fly in the face of what our Idaho content standards are all about. We want students to see how different standards, skills, and knowledge work in unison to complete a task, and those tasks are measured with the assessment target. We don't go to the standards level because those are just such minute pieces that we want students to use several of them to solve each of the questions or tasks that we present. So within any given item on our assessments, interim or summative, there may be 3 different standards being assessed. And the test has been written in a very sophisticated way to allow us to do that. So we go to the target level. The assessment targets describe the evidence to be provided that students will provide to back up our claim that they can or cannot do something. In our summative assessment, and our interim comprehensive assessment, you will see achievement levels 1, 2, 3, and 4, with 3 and 4 being proficient and 1 and 2 not being proficient. You will see those scale scores and the overall performance level on the individual student report. You will also see the performance categories. They do say that they're claim achievement, but essentially it's performance. And when we think about an entire assessment that only has about 35 items, we have to have enough data to clearly say if a student knows something or they don't. And so we don't give numbers here. We just say, yeah, generally they have answered enough questions correctly that we can clearly say they're above standard, but we don't want to give an exact point. And then we also look at student performance on claims this way, this green bar, of course, being the standard error of measure, and so the variability in the assessment, and then the black line being where they were when they took the test on any given day, on this day. So we have similar kinds of scales that are used on our interim assessments. In the fall, I encourage teachers to start by looking at their ISAT data as quickly as they can when they know which students are in their class. Each teacher is going to look at their current students I have sitting in front of me right now. How did they do on the ISAT? We're going to pull up 3 different reports: the claim report, the target report, and the individual student reports. And the reason that these reports are important is that they tell us something, they give us some important information for the first day of class even. So these reports really can be a launching point into the interim assessments and give us kind of a large or a broad perspective of the layout of each of our classes. We now have 3 years of data, so we can see student performance over time, teacher performance over time, school performance over time, grade level performance over time, district performance over time. So there's quite a bit of data here to deal with and to manipulate. And we want to make sure that we're using the data in a way that tells us what to do next and how to look forward. I did add these very specific directions in case you'd like to use this webinar or some of these slides for your own training. In order to look at a summative claim report, a teacher should go to the portal. Once they're at the home page of the portal, click on the ELA Literacy and Math tab. Select the online reporting system. Click on Score Reports. And then on the home page dashboard, they're going to select Smarter Summative. I apologize again that I didn't change this slide. 1718, I'll change that before I post it. 2016-17 is correct because we're looking at the score from last spring. And then they're going to select this middle radio button. So it scores for my current students. A widget comes up when the teacher clicks on their roster. So they're going to select their content area, the grade that they're going to look at. If they're a 6th grade teacher and they ask to look at current students, they'll just see this 5th grade because that was the grade that their kids were in last year. In the middle row, they'll select who. These drop downs have a variety of choices. They'll select what and make sure that says claims, and they'll look at the current administration and then click view. What they will get is something that looks like this. This happens to be from math, and they'll clearly be able to see what I call RTI or intervention levels. Those students in Tier 1 are those that are doing okay. Some are very close, kind of right in the middle of being proficient, and others are doing quite well, as you can see at the top here. All of these columns are sortable so that you can look at a claim at a time, you can look at overall achievement, and get this broad picture of each of your classes as a teacher. You can see that there are some students here that may, and you may want to check that with, you know, the first few weeks of class, but they may need some intervention in order to be ready for this year. These students here clearly are not in a position where they are going to be comfortable with being taught new information this year. So it shows the need for scaffolding, and you're going to need to approach activities giving these students greater access, some support to these students, and maybe something a little bit, making it a little bit more difficult even for some of these students. Again, what will you do next? And that is, I'm going to, from day one, make sure that some of these students have some scaffolding. In order to look at a target report, we're going to click on the teacher or school to start with the grade content area that's applicable. And then in the fourth row this time, instead of selecting claims, I'm going to select targets and the current administration. Click view. And then the teacher will see a target report. This is just a classroom report. Excuse me, it doesn't go to the individual level because there just aren't enough items for us to get reliable data drilling down that far when there are only 35 to 45 items on the entire assessment. But we have two pieces of information on this report. One is, these are all assessment targets, and we like the fact that these are not numbers or scores. We actually read this, have to read it and say, so this is what they're supposed to be doing, not just a 274 or 275. We read these sentences to get a sense of the evidence that students have been asked to provide on the assessment. And then looking at our class overall, we get a reading of how close they are to proficiency. So our middle score here would be what proficient or not proficient. If there's an equal sign, it means the students are kind of hanging right in the middle. So they're close either way. They might be a little bit over, they might be a little bit under, but they're close to proficiency. If there's a minus, they are clearly below. So many students would have had to not respond correctly to these items for there to be a minus in this category. If there's an asterisk, it means there weren't enough items to get a sufficient reading on that particular assessment target. If there's a plus in this category, it means that most of the students would have had to respond correctly to items aligned to this target, and that overall within this current class, that is a strength when we look at proficiency. The next column gives us an idea of how students are performing based on our class average. So we're looking then at the average of all of our students and saying, within our group, what were our highs and lows, regardless of proficiency, but what were our highs and lows? And then generally, those targets that have 2 pluses are pretty reliably targets that students collectively in this particular group, data set, class, roster, are doing well with. And you may, as a teacher, not need to spend as much time on these moving forward. They're well prepared for this grade, the grade that they're in now. And then these targets that have minuses, not only are they not proficient, but this would be a weakness within our class. Those we really want to pay attention to and make sure that we clearly understand that target and what is expected of students to provide when they have items or tasks related to that target. I blew up this text here because we're going to go further and look at that in a couple future slides here. So I'll stop now. I think are on schedule. Okay, I don't have too much more to go through here, but I'm going to stop and answer a few questions. And if we go over today, I'm sorry, we will be posting this. So if there are people that need to go at 1:30 and we're not quite finished, know that you can go back and listen to this later. A question is, what are claim 2 and 3 in math aligned to? When we look at the letters, I'm assuming of those targets on the summative blueprint, they don't match the targets or cluster headings in the standard. They are aligned to the mathematical practices. So essentially those 8 student behaviors that are outlined in the standards documents, behaviors that students are supposed to show us, claim 1 is a secondary claim in every one of these items, but we're primarily trying to get a read on student behaviors, such as communicating their thoughts, persevering to solve a problem. We're trying to use the data from those to see if students can stick with an item or a task that has multiple steps that they're going to need to go through. Suggestions about how teachers could use the interim assessment blocks for their student achievement goals. Oh boy, this is a tough one for the Idaho teacher evaluation process. I'm just really wary and concerned if we then start to use this for something that is more high stakes, like teacher evaluation. That really has to be another discussion and have it be offline and really involve some of our folks over in the teacher evaluation department. So I'll see if I can work on that a little bit and maybe put some information on the Edmodo user group, but these were not intended for that purpose. And so anytime we begin to use data for a purpose that was not intended, you know, like we initially have with our IRI screeners, anytime we begin to try to make data and information fit for a purpose that wasn't initially intended, I think we lose a little bit. So try to address that question, but not in the context of this webinar. So I just wanted to review a few reports here and show you what they look like. This particular one is a teacher report. I pulled up West Data School District because they're super nice. They do a lot of interim assessments and they let me use their data a lot. So thank you very much. Thank you, Toby. Thank you, Jolene. This is the number of students that have tested, and then these are the number of blocks. These are the blocks and the number of students who participated in each of those blocks. And then these are the overall performance categories. So the middle school, it would probably be an administrator, a counselor, someone like that, if they wanted to look across all of the teachers or even the rosters in a school. This might be a way that they could do that. I've then pulled a particular teacher, and this is where a teacher then can begin to look at her rosters. So I teach the same thing in each of these math classes. How are the groups doing in relationship to each other? And so I can then look at that data, make sure that my students, the students that I wanted to test, have all tested and been assessed in that area. The interim block report looks very similar to our claim report, except now the blocks are listed across the top. And by the way, I'm in the online reporting system right now. That is the initial place where all of our summative and interim data are. If the test window has closed or if the students did not complete a block, it will say expired. And again, you can manipulate this report in a variety of ways. It shows us, for example, how did our class overall do on expressions and equations 1. Students are cut off. They would be in this column over here to the left. This is an interim comprehensive report, and what it shows us are the different claim areas. Here's concepts and procedures. This is when we would use an interim comprehensive assessment. That might be very useful for a student that does not have an ISAT score from last year, and you'd like them to have one. Maybe they were in another state or even another country, and they don't have a report, ISAT report, ISAT score from last spring. You want to know how they're doing. But this particular one is the classroom level for individual items, and it's by claim and by target. And it shows you the number of points on each item, and then what percentage of students got 2 points, 1 point, 0 points, for example. We do have folks that use these mid-year. The block reports all operate the same way, and any report that we get at the teacher or classroom level, we can also get at a student level. So this bottom report would be for an individual student. Here's number and operation space 10 for grade 5. And these numbers are the numbers of the items on the assessment, and they would look the same on when you looked at this assessment in AVA. These are the assessment targets aligned with those, and we can tell whether or not the student earned the point or not. It's not so much about the item, although we can look at the item because that gives us some valuable information too, but you can go over this with students and say, you know, it looks like you need a little bit more work on the place value system, although on this item, they responded correctly, but on this item they didn't. So they missed a couple of the questions on place value. So this is the type of report that every time a block is completed, I would review with students. The individual student then, and this report changes all year long as they participate in more of the block assessments. They would have one for math and they would also have one for ELA. It shows the overall performance level on the block, and then for each of the blocks, the assessment target related to aligned to each item and whether or not they earned that point or not. Okay, I don't see any additional questions at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and go on and take a look at some of the aligned resources that can support classroom instruction, specifically the item specifications documents, the digital library, and the Airways data tool. I pulled up the summative target report that we looked at before because, as I mentioned, it can launch us into some information about what to do next. In this case, it's telling us some areas of greater need. I'm going to focus on this area right here. It's within literary text in the reading claim. And this target is central ideas. Students would need to be able to identify or determine a theme or central idea from details in the text or to summarize the text. I'm a teacher and I want to know more about that. And so I am going to go and look at the interim block for grade 5. What should students know in that area and primarily about that target? What would they have been asked to do? What kinds of items or tasks would they have been asked to respond to? I go into the assessment viewing application, I choose the grade, and I click next to the assessment to preview it. So this student, then I thought, well, I'm going to go ahead and assign this to my students and get some more information about how they respond to these individual items. So I assign literary text block to my students in this grade. And now I want to look in particular at those targets that were on central ideas. And sure enough, most of my students are not responding correctly to those items. There's some other valuable information here too, but for right now, I'm just kind of zeroing in on that one target so that I can learn more about it. The item specifications documents are currently listed on our state website. There is a link right here. Everywhere I go, I encourage districts to download these and put them on their district servers so that teachers know where they are and they can easily access them. I wanted to learn a lot more about what students are asked to do for this target, this central ideas target. There are some clarifications here. It tells me specifically which standards are assessed with this assessment target. It also tells me the depth of knowledge at which students are going to be assessed. Depth of knowledge and the cognitive rigor matrix is a whole nother training in and of itself, and perhaps I should do a webinar on that one, a brief webinar on that one as well. But the depth of knowledge has to do with how deeply students need to know the content in order to respond correctly. Not to be confused with item difficulty. That's something else. Further describes the evidence that students will be required to show, and it gives us some information about the types of items that will perhaps assess this target. But on the pages following, it actually gives us task models. These task models can very clearly help us integrate within the classroom some similar types of questioning, or even if we are doing an assignment or some homework or a warm-up activity, we can provide similar types of items. It very clearly shows us the success criteria that we use in formative assessment, and shows us that target evidence, and then gives us some appropriate stems. So as a teacher, I might say, what 2 sentences do you think best describe the theme? In an item like this on the assessment, students would need to get both of those correct in order for us to be sure or have a better idea that they really know that content. And so every one of these task models, with every one of these pages for each assessment target, there are about 3 or 4 task models, depending on the different ways that we can ask students for evidence. So I've heard from a lot of teachers that when they really get in and they begin using these, that they're very good support documents for classroom instruction. It just allows them to look at what they're doing and kind of compare it to the different ways that they could be asking for this evidence in the classroom. From there, we can go to the digital library and look under our grade, that particular grade, either that 5th grade or the 6th grade that the students are in now. We can go into reading literature. Most, not all, the work is still being done, but most of these activities have now been aligned to assessment targets as well. We have teachers continuing to work in these work groups that are doing that work. And so I'm going to go ahead and search and pull out some activities that clearly will help students do this, and kind of just do something outside of my textbook or my traditional curriculum, and see if I can find some additional activities to help me formatively within instruction assess whether or not students are understanding this. But we also have now in the digital library resources folder, and also in the digital library itself, these documents that we call playlists. And there are some that are just playlists and others that are called connections playlists. And the playlists give us an idea of what might be some of the very best activities in the digital library to do for this particular block assessment. There was not a grade 5 or a grade 6, and so I pulled up the one for grade 4. Again, this work is still ongoing, so we don't have one of these for every single grade and every single assessment block, but there are certainly enough of them and some ones that can be helpful. When we click on the hot text in these PDFs, it will take us right to those activities in the digital library. I found this grade 7 playlist, even though I'm a 6th grade teacher, for read literary text. I went to below standard and I clicked on an introduction to theme, and it was exactly what I was looking for. It was 5th grade standards, which again, my students have just come into 6th grade, but they were having trouble with this, and it's target 2. And that is the exact same target that I pulled up in the item specifications document and the target from our summative target report that we were having difficulty with. So I can go through the materials. It gives me a lesson plan and just some supplementary things to do so that I can address and maybe refresh students about this assessment target and the standards that align to it before I start teaching this at the 6th grade level. Another one of our newer resources is called Airways. Airways is another tile in the portal, and Airways pulls out for us some important information. So the 5 items that the students in our class did the best on, and the 5 items the students in our class did the worst on. So, and then we can see all the items, but Airways also allows us to look at the individual item level for every single student, so that that data is there if we want it. And it tells us, again, the item numbers, those align to our other reports. I've covered up the names of students. I pulled out that 5th grade ELA IAB on reading literature, the one I assigned to my 6th grade students to get some better information. And sure enough, item 10 was central ideas. They're having trouble with that. And I could see the questions and the types of questioning and what students had to show and respond to as far as central ideas. And that can give me a really good idea, right down to the different types of items, what they're being asked to do and how they're struggling with that. If it's an item that only 1 or 2 students got wrong, I would go to those individual students and ask them to explain their thinking. But if it's an item that everyone in the class is having difficulty with, then 2 things are happening. Either the students in the class don't know that content, or there may be something about that item that's tripping them up and that they're having difficulty with. And so that's important information that can tell me what to do next. We've just AIR has just posted the Airways module. It's a fantastic little module about all the new things in Airways for this year, one of those being longitudinal reports. The module and the user guide can be found in the resources section of the portal. And this tool is new enough, and I don't use it every day, so I really learned a lot by going through that Airways module. Airways is specific to interim assessment data, so it doesn't have any way for us to examine last year's summative data, just this current year's interim assessment data. I'll stop now and answer a couple questions if there are any before I go into our closing. Is there a math item specifications document? Yes, Sue, there is, and it is the same place on our website. If you click on assessment and then over on the right-hand side, click on ISAT math, you will on that page find the content specifications for mathematics. I often get asked about the benefits of the interim assessments, and are they really helping people do better on the summative test for their summative outcomes? So we don't have at this point any formal data on that. I have run some data myself, and I've looked just mostly at percent proficient, and there is evidence that students are benefiting and teachers are benefiting. These are the things that I hear over and over again, so I included them on this slide. Students are more comfortable with the assessment software, the tools, the types of items, and using designated supports and accommodations. So many people have told me that their students are feeling better because they've been perhaps using this software multiple times all through the year. Students and teachers say that they feel more prepared. They know more what to expect. There's less anxiety when they go to take that assessment at the end of the year. I don't know about you, but if I had to use software, got to use software only one time a year, and it was for something as high stakes as ISAT is, I would feel very uncomfortable. And so this gives students the opportunity to feel better prepared, to really have the teacher be able to work with them on that content so that they go into that end of year test feeling more prepared. Students show more commitment. Sorry, my slide needs to be corrected, but students show more that they're more committed and involved with the assessment. I heard from one school that their students sat down to take the ISAT last year, and they say, we do this stuff all the time, but they understand that it's more like the playoffs instead of one of their weekly or every other week games that they might be playing. So now they have a chance to really show what they know, but they are very involved in that because they've been taking these smaller assessments, and they've been working on these skills all through the year. I've heard from many districts that their testing time on the ISAT was reduced. One specifically told me it had been reduced by as much as a third. And so students are not needing to find buttons and to learn how to use tools while they're taking the test, because they've been doing that all year on the interim assessments. So they're able to go in and just take the ISAT without having to learn about how to use the assessment at the same time. Teachers also have told me that they have a better understanding of the standards, and they certainly have a better understanding of how the students are being assessed on those standards. And teachers, many teachers have told me that they feel like it's improved their teaching of the standards. Teachers can really learn about the strengths and the limitations. These standards, Idaho content standards, are still fairly new to us, and teachers want that feedback about how they're doing so that they can tweak the different things that they're doing and see how different groups of students are doing within their classes. So they really appreciate the support that they get through using these assessments. Lakeland School District had scores that were quite good the first year, and the first year that we had the assessment, and I asked Georgianne Griffiths, who at that time was the testing coordinator, do you think your widespread use in the elementary school, particularly of the interim assessments, helped your scores this year and helped the way that things came out? And she said, I don't know if it did or not, but our students said it made all the difference in the world. And to me, say no more, because if the students are saying that it makes all the difference in the world, then we need to continue to provide this resource for them. There are too many success stories out there to even mention, but I've just put a few off the top of my head that came up, and you can kind of read for yourself. But the Pocatello School District has been using the interim assessment since the very first year, and they've just gotten so very sophisticated in their usage, and continually are not just above state averages, but significantly above state averages. And teachers are feeling very supported. And there's very widespread and systemic use in Pocatello. Marsing School District just started using the interim assessments last year. In their 10th grade in ELA, they went from having 70% of their students proficient to 90%, and in math, from 29% of their students proficient to 73% in proficient, and that was just in 1 year. And they identified the interim assessments as being one of the tools that really helped them do that. Overall, in all of the grades district-wide, they showed 8% improvement in ELA and 7% in math, and so that's pretty significant. Mountain Home looked at all of their teachers' scores and talked to their teachers that showed the most significant improvement, asked them what they thought the difference was, and the person that I work with in Mountain Home said all of those teachers indicated that the interim assessments helped them do that. This year, they had 5% overall proficiency increase across the district than they had from the year before. Last year, they were actually down. This year, they're up a 5% overall improvement. West Ada has made a large commitment to using the interim assessments, and claim that they have lots of pockets of excellence. As a large district, they're 10 to 13% above state averages in all areas, and it's a big machine to move. So anytime you see that, you know, I mean, there are many schools that have 85% proficient students in many of the grade levels. And so when you see overall 50 to 60% proficiency across the district in their grade levels, you know that something is really happening for them. Jefferson School District over in the eastern part of the state, up 8% in ELA and 7% in math over the first year that we gave the assessment. They are using the interim assessments very significantly, and it's very much supported by leadership. Murtaugh School District is one of those smaller school districts in the middle of the state. They had went from 30% proficient in math overall to 50% proficient in math in the last 2 years. They use the interim assessments very significantly. And in no way do I mean to say that is what made the difference and that is all that made the difference. Interim assessments are a tool to complement the other fantastic things that school districts are doing to teach the standards. And so it isn't ever one thing. It is always a multitude of things that help students to be successful. But these particular districts have indicated that they feel that using the entire system of assessment is one of the things that has helped them. I have a picture here of Soda Springs. They had some pretty significant improvement in this last year, 8% in ELA and 4% in math just in 1 year. St. Mary's has been using the interim assessments since the beginning, and they have had a couple teachers working and being paid by Smart Amounts to work in the different alignment projects. So they've used them quite extensively. Victory Charter School this last year was up 10% in math in just 1 year. And so they're used across several charter schools that all work together. And then Marsh Valley, especially Lava Elementary, their third grade teacher has had 100% proficiency for 2 years in a row now. And she really credits that to her use of the interim assessments and the item specification documents that helped her to better understand how students are being asked to show their learning and to do that same kind of thing integrated into her curriculum in the classroom. So really too many, I know I'm leaving lots of folks off this list, but too many success stories to even mention out there. Just some best practices and then we'll wind this up. We've gone a little bit over today and I apologize for that. If there's more intentionality, why are we using these interim assessments? How are we going to use them to best meet our needs? What are our goals and how will they help us meet the needs of students? If we're very intentional about how they're used and how they're integrated with what you're doing now, we seem to see better results. There should be some planning involved. If this has not been rolled out to teachers, how will we roll it out? What are we going to give up perhaps to make time for giving the interim assessments and for having conversations about the data? Seeing greater improvement where there is leadership support and some expectations and saying you're not on your own in this, we're all together working and we support you and we have expectations that you'll use this resource to complement what you're already doing. Places where collaboration time is provided or data meetings are provided seem to be also one of the best practices that has helped people to better utilize this tool. And then once the implementation, and it doesn't usually happen in a year, gets to the point that it's more systemic, all grades, all blocks, all schools, or most, we're seeing more overall whole district improvement. So those are just a few of the best practices that we've seen that are really making a difference. At this point, I'm going to kind of wind this up, but I know that there are a few people on the webinar that have used the interim assessments. So if you'd like to type anything, share anything into the question box that you'd like me to mention and share with other people, I'd be glad to do that if you want to take a minute to do that. Otherwise, I think there are a lot of districts and a lot of people in the districts that some of you might call if you want more information about how people are going about using these. We've just posted the interim assessment technical report, and for some it's a little bit overkill, but for those of you that really want to understand the underpinnings, this is a report that demonstrates some supportive validity for the interim assessments, how they're used, characteristics of the test items and the test forms. Excuse me, it's posted on our portal. So today we've reviewed pretty extensively the interim assessments. As I mentioned, I did do a webinar already on the digital library, and you can find that. As always, I'm available to answer questions. I do want you to realize that this is a very integrated system. It's very well thought out. It's very comprehensive, and it's here for teachers and for students, in support of teachers and students. And so I hope that if you're not using the interim assessments already, that you'll take a look at those and consider doing those, and maybe start them on a small scale to see how folks respond to those. We have a few more questions that I'll try to address that are in the question box. Does the longitudinal icon only appear for teachers that have more than one assessment in the same subject area? The longitudinal data in Airways, I think, is what this user is asking about. The longitudinal data can be for the same block given in the same year, or it can be the third grade block of like number and operations, the fourth grade block of number and operations. So it will show 1 year of the same block or multiple years of the same block at different grades. So you can learn a lot more about that longitudinal report in the Airways module that's now posted on the website. As always, please feel free to contact me with your questions, and I'd be glad to answer them, refer you to other people that can answer them. I know that one of our teachers from West Ada at the Math and Science Conference this past week did a very good workshop on the interim assessments, and I'd love it if I could have her go to each of the schools or districts, because she's really presenting that information from a teacher's point of view. She teaches math and social studies and talks about how she uses the ELA literacy data in her social studies teaching, and of course the math data in her math teaching. And it's great when people from the field are now able to communicate and bring along to others about how to use the resources that they're finding very helpful. Okay, sorry we've gone over time today. I appreciate those of you that have joined us live. And again, give us a few days. We'll try to get this posted on the website along with the recording and the handouts. Have a great day.